Hey, this is Brad from Argali, and today we're going to talk about knife sharpening. So this is video number 1 in a 2-part series that we're doing showing 2 different devices that Worksharp makes that I think anybody at home can use to learn how to professionally sharpen your knives at home and get consistent results. This first video, we're going to be talking about the Ken Onion Edition knife sharpener with this Elite Sharpening attachment. Now this is a belt sander style knife sharpener, which is intimidating to a lot of people to use, but I think with a little bit of practice it's very approachable and you can learn how to sharpen any knife consistently. Now I'm going to show you all the steps. So we're going to show you all the steps that I take. We're going to talk about belts, belt progression, techniques for how to freehand sharpen your knife, because I think this thing is a great device. It's an approachable tool. I think a lot of people are intimidated by the idea of sharpening on their knives freehand, but I confidently say that I think you can learn how to do it with a little bit of practice. So let's dig in. Okay, so we have 2 separate pieces here for this knife sharpening system. We've got the Ken Onion knife sharpener, and then you have their Elite Sharpening attachment. This is essentially just your motor, your belt sander, and then this is the device that you put a belt on that has an angle guide here, as well as a belt tensioner and a platen right here to help you set your knife on to get consistent results. Now if you buy this, it comes with smaller belt sander attachment, a knife angle guide, which makes it, I think, in theory, a lot easier for you to sharpen a knife at a given angle by just like plopping your knife into it, pulling it through, make sure you get a consistent result at whatever angle you want. I do think that this device right here gives you a lot more flexibility with how you sharpen your knife, and I also think it's pretty easy to get consistent results with a little bit of practice. And I do know we hear that I think people are very concerned about freehand sharpening knives on a device like this, which makes a lot of sense, but I do think, with a little bit of practice, you can learn how to use this device right here with a belt sander to freehand sharpen your knives and get really consistent results. So what I would say is don't be intimidated by the idea of sharpening your knives on a belt sander freehand like this. It's not as complicated as you might think, and you can also, start with some of if you have any less expensive knives, some old pocket knives, whatever laying around the house, practice on those knives a handful of times before you move to your nicer hunting knives. Now, the way we like to sharpen our knives, so if you buy one of our knives, if you send one of our knives back to get resharpened as a part of our lifetime free sharpening system, you're going to get a full flat grind back on your knife. There are a number of different ways to sharpen knives. I'm not going to get into any of that right now, but what I'm going to show you today is how to get that, what you might think of as like a V grind on the sharpening edge of your knife. So the first thing you want to do before you connect the Elite Sharpening device to the Ken Onion knife sharpener, you're going to want to make a few adjustments to this device. The first thing you want to do is set your angle. There's a hex key on the back of this. You can use to loosen this if you want. You shouldn't need to. You can just loosen this guy right here, and then adjust it to the angle you want. We like to do 20 degrees. I think 20 degrees is a nice balance between sharpness and edge retention. So I'm going to set my angle right there. The other thing you're going to want to do is this wheel right here you can move this to different, there's 2 holes on the Elite Sharpening attachment system here. I believe anyway, when you buy this thing is going to be set a little bit further away from this wheel right here. You want to move this wheel closer to this one, and what that does is it's going to help reduce the flex in your belt, so it's going to be easier to get a nice V grind on your knife. So what you have to do is just take a hex key, unscrew it, pull it out, and then move it up, whatever that is, about 1/3 of an inch, and then screw it back in. And once you do that, you're almost ready to go. The last thing you want to do is set your belt tension. So right here, you have this belt tensioner device right here. You can, theoretically, you should be able to use this little red circle to loosen it and then adjust it a little bit. But if it doesn't work, you just get your hex key out again, loosen it up, and then slide this down a little bit. The whole point of that is just make sure, this is your belt tensioner setting right here. You want to make sure your belt tensioner is putting as much tension on your belt as possible. So again, what you're trying to do is reduce the amount of flex you get in these abrasive belts when the device is running. So once you do that, I'm going to attach this thing to the knife sharpener, or excuse me, to the Ken Onion knife sharpener here. I'm going to set it on a table here. Before I even put an abrasive on, what I want to tell you is the ergonomics of how you use this thing do matter. So the height at which you set this thing, your body positioning, that all really matters. So make sure you're squared up to the device. Make sure it's the appropriate distance. So as you're moving your knife across the belt, you're not in an uncomfortable position, which might cause you to dip one way or the other to get like a weird grind on your knife. So I've got it set up here. It's square to me. I've got it on our table here. Honestly, if I was being really picky, I would like this thing to be a little bit higher, so I didn't have to for my height, so I didn't have to lower my arms as much, but this works for me. Let's talk about belt progression right here, okay? There are different belt progressions you can use to sharpen a knife. I'm going to assume that if you're sharpening a knife for the first time on one of these, what you're going to need to do is try and get a burr, right? So your goal is you're going to sharpen one side of your knife until you can feel a burr, and then you're going to go to a less aggressive abrasive, and you're going to start flipping your knife over from side to side. There are different grit abrasives you can use to get that burr. The more aggressive your abrasive, the more metal it's going to take off, and the more experienced and careful you want to be when you do that. So one option is to use like a fairly aggressive abrasive like this 120 grit right here, and it will, if you can just do 1 or 2 passes with this abrasive at a very, very light pressure, you can get a burr really quickly, take this abrasive off, and then move to another abrasive, a less aggressive abrasive. What I would recommend, especially if you're just getting started with this style of sharpener, is really 3 belts. Start with an X65 abrasive, which will take off quite a bit of metal from your knife, and the goal is to try and do about 2 or 3 passes on each side of your knife, and that's it before you move to the next belt. So I have X65. I have a X22 from Worksharp, and then an X4, which is really kind of your honing belt. Now, if I wanted to also use a strop belt at the end to strop my knife, that's fine too. But these 3 belts right here are going to get you most of what you need. So what I'm going to do to get started is I'm going to take this X65 on here, and I'm going to put it on the Elite knife sharpener here. I'm going to release the belt tensioner, and you can see you've got a trigger on the other side here, and then there's a button to kind of keep that you can compress here to keep the belt running. In terms of speed, there's a wheel on this Worksharp, the Ken Onion Edition knife sharpener here, and that you can increase or decrease the speed that the belt runs. You want to do, I like doing it low and slow, so put that knife sharpener or that speed as low as it goes before you even get started. Now that we have our belt on here, I just want to go through technique real quick about how you should use this device once you get your belts on there. So the first thing I'll say is when it comes to pressure on the belt, you want to use incredibly light pressure. So think of just the weight of the knife should be barely touching the belt as you run it across the belt here. So you don't want to push down on the belt, because when you do that, that belt is going to flex, and it's going to cause that, as it flexes, it's going to grind your knife. Instead of that full flat, V-shaped grind, you're going to start getting more of a convex grind on the edge of your knife. Now, of course, there are people out there who want a convex edge on their knife, and that is how you get a convex edge, is by putting a little bit more pressure on it. Nice light pressure. It's all you need. Let the belt do the work. Don't try and force your knife onto the abrasive. The other thing I'll say is when it comes to trying to get the right angle, so because we have the belt set at 20 degrees, when you set your knife down on the platen here, I'm going to try and get if you can see this, the spine of the knife, and just by the choil here, to sit on the platen there, which is kind of your guide. So you're trying to get your knife to be flat. So when I bring it up from the platen to the abrasive, it's at a nice flat angle, and that way this 20-degree sharpener will sharpen my secondary bevel angle at 20 degrees. Now if you have your knife facing down or facing up, you're going to get a different angle than 20 degrees. I think that makes sense, but the point of this is just set your knife down on the platen like this and make sure it's not tilted down. I like to set my knife down here every time before I touch the abrasive, just to kind of bring it back to center and bring it back to zero. So set my knife down here, and then I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to touch the knife down. I'm going to bring it across the abrasive, and then I'm going to stop with my tip in the abrasive. I'm not going to go outside of the abrasive. So I'm going to come up here, up to the abrasive, and I'm going to bring it across the abrasive, stop, pull it off. Okay, I'm going to do that a couple times with this X65 abrasive like that, pull it off, and then I'm going to feel for a burr. This is my actual personal hunting knife, which is dull right now because I used it a bunch this hunting season, so we're going to see how sharp we can get it with this system. So here we go. Okay, that took 2 passes right there. So this step that I'm doing right now is I am trying to reset the edge of my knife, and there's 2 things I'm looking for when I'm doing that. One is I'm feeling for a burr. If you've ever heard people talk about looking for a burr and you don't really know what that means, it's really not that complicated or really hard to figure out. Essentially all you're doing when you're setting a burr is you're sharpening one side of your knife until the sharpening material on the edge of your knife kind of rolls over. Imagine like a wave, kind of going over the edge of your knife, and you can feel that wave ever so subtly. So I can feel a burr on this side of the knife because I've been sharpening on this side of the knife right now. And if I feel on this side of the knife where I've been sharpening from, I don't feel anything. I go to the other side of the knife and I start running my thumb across it like that, and I can feel that material on the other side. You don't need to really feel a huge burr, just it's real subtle. But what you want to make sure you do is you're feeling a burr from the tip to the end of your knife. What that tells you is the entire length of your cutting surface has been reshaped to the point where you have a burr. If you only feel a burr on the top of your knife or on the bottom of your knife or somewhere in between, what that means is you probably have an inconsistent stroke when you're kind of coming across and sharpening your knife. So anyways, you're looking for a burr, and the other thing I'm doing here is I'm also visually inspecting the edge of my knife here to see if kind of the reveal, so the amount of that V grind is consistent from here to here. Now I'm looking at this knife right now, and it isn't quite consistent from the edge from here to here. And what that means is, practically speaking, you probably won't notice a whole lot of difference in performance in terms of how the knife cuts. But ideally what you want is a consistency from here to here in terms of how much of that V grind you can see on both sides of your knife. Okay, so we sharpened one side, we reshaped one side of the knife. Now I'm going to flip this knife over. I did 2 passes on one side, now I'm going to do 2 passes on the other side. no more, no less, right? So you want to do consistent numbers of strokes on each side of the knife with all these abrasives as you work your way from aggressive to less aggressive. I do want to say right now I am reshaping the edge of this knife. If I come back and you go use this knife and I need to touch it up, I would not come back and use this X65. Once I set the edge of this knife to 20 degrees, the only reason I would use an X65 is if I need to reshape the edge to a different angle, or let's say, you know, I took a big chunk out of this edge right here somehow, and I need to come back and try and I need to reshape the blade because it's been marred somehow. Ideally though, when you're touching up your knife or resharpening it, once you set your edge, you're just using some of the lighter abrasives and not coming back and using an aggressive abrasive. It's just unnecessary. The more you use this knife, just keep in mind that it's taking metal off of your edge. So the more you use an aggressive abrasive, the more material you're taking off your knife. You do that over time, you're just going to wear out your knife. So less is more when it comes to sharpening, and I'll talk about some of this too as I get into lower abrasives. So now I'm going to sharpen the other side. Here's what I'm going to tell you too. Here's a little tip. As I learned how to, first started sharpening knives, I found that I sharpen as I move my body across here. I sharpened this way differently than I sharpened this way. I found that I would like drop my right elbow. All of that technique really matters. So this is why practicing really matters. So when you're sharpening, you got to learn. You need to really learn to keep some like light pressure with. I like to use my fingers on the edge of the blade here. And as you're coming across, make sure you're getting a nice consistent result as you move across the belt. Pay attention to how your body's moving. If you tend to drop an elbow, you're going to see that in the edge of your knife. A little bit of practice. Don't be intimidated. Again, it's not that hard. You can do it, but those little technique tricks do matter. So, okay, I'm visually inspecting my knife here to see if it's the way I want. And that's, it's pretty good, but so just now, I just noticed, this is a good tip. I didn't have the same amount of pressure going this way as I did going this way, and I can visually see the difference. Again, practically speaking, it's pretty good, but I'm a perfectionist, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sharpen this side one more time. I'm gonna flip the knife over and sharpen on the other side one more time as well, because you want to be consistent, right? So I'm going to sharpen this side one more time to try and get a more consistent reveal on that bevel angle. I like that a lot better. Okay. Again, now I'm looking at both sides. They both look really good to me right now. Perfect. Okay, now I'm going to move to a less aggressive abrasive now that I've set my edge. I'm going to move to an X22 abrasive. And now I'm going to, ideally, again, you're doing 3 strokes on the other side. Now I'm going to alternate strokes. Before I do that, let me just remind you. So when I start this next abrasive, the last side that I sharpened was this side. So when I move to this next abrasive, I want to make sure I sharpen the other side, the side that you can feel the burr on. Okay, so I'm going to start on this side. Okay, so now, again, I'm going to visually inspect the knife to make sure it still looks good, the reveal looks good, across the edge still looks good to me. Okay, now we're going to move to our final belt, the X4 belt. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to alternate sides, start with the opposite side of the last side I sharpened. The one thing I didn't mention earlier is the reason you want to stop your tip in the middle of that belt is if you pull your knife all the way through, it can have a tendency to kind of roll the very tip of your knife. So if you want that kind of really nice pointy sharp edge, you need to stop in the middle of the belt and pull your knife off instead of coming all the way across the belt. All right. So we use, for our knives, we use a relatively hard steel in our knives. So this is an S35 steel. If you don't have a really hard steel like S35, you might not need to do 3 passes on each side. You might be able to get away with 2, but 3 should be enough. And then I'm going to test for sharpness after I do this last step here. So now if I wanted to, I could use a stropping belt right now to kind of get that polish on the knife edge, but after I do all those steps, this knife should be really sharp. But if you want to just test at home how sharp it is, just an easy way to do that that's relatively safe is just see if it will slice through paper. If your knife will slice through paper without much effort, then you know it's sharp. Again, the narrower the angle of your knife, the sharper it's going to be. What we did with this knife is sharpen it to 20 degrees, which is a nice, I think, balance between edge retention and sharpness. So if this knife is sharp, when you take a piece of paper like this, kind of a stiff piece of just standard 8.5 by 11 paper, and I'm going to run my knife down the edge of this paper, it should slice through it. Not a whole lot of effort. So sharp knife right there. That will shave hair off of your arm. I hope this video was helpful. Again, it's kind of intimidating for people to use to freehand sharpen their knives, but again, with a little bit of practice, I hope you can see that it's really not that complicated to sharpen your knives with a belt sander style sharpener. This Ken Onion Edition knife sharpener from Worksharp is a great knife sharpening device. We use it all the time. I personally use it all the time. This is how I sharpen all my knives at home. It's an easy to use device, super simple to use. If you have any questions about anything, techniques, belts, whatever, feel free to leave them in the comments below and we will do our best to answer them.